Well, good morning, everybody, and happy, what day is it? Happy Monday. The days all kind of blur together for me these days. So this is the panel called Water Quality and Quantity After the Fires. And we have truly an extraordinary panel of speakers here for you today. So this is the format that we're going to follow. I'll speak for about maybe 3 or 4 minutes to introduce the panelists and to give just some context to our talk today. After that, each panelist will take no more than 6 minutes to give us their opening remarks, their reflections on the fires, their personal, professional insights on what has happened. Hopefully with a focus on water quality and water quantity issues. After that portion is over, we will have one set of moderator questions for each panelist. We've asked that their responses be limited to no more than 2 to 3 minutes. And if we follow that timeline, we will make it out of here in the 50 minutes that we've been allocated for this panel.
And if you're not the moderator, the next one in this room is just going to be vicious.
Indeed. Well, last year we started late, and then before our time was anywhere near over, somebody came in and said, you have to stop. So this is why we want to keep to this time. So let me start by introducing our panelists. Immediately to my left is the Honorable Adrin Nazarian, Los Angeles City Council member for the 2nd District. He's the chair of the Energy and Environment Committee of the LA City Council. He's the former state assembly member. Right next to Council member Nazarian is Mr. Anselmo Collins. He's the senior assistant general manager in charge of the water system for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Right next to him is Ms. Felicia Marcus. She is currently the visiting fellow at Stanford University, also the elected fellow at the National Academy of Public Administration. She is the former chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Right next to Ms. Marcus is Ms. Liz Crosson. She is the Chief Sustainability, Resilience, and Innovation Officer at the Metropolitan Water District, former Director of Infrastructure in the Office of Mayor Garcetti, and she's the former executive director of LA Waterkeeper. And right next to her is Dr. Mark Gold. He is the director of Water Scarcity Solutions at NRDC. He's the former deputy secretary for Coast Policy at the California Natural Resources Agency, and he's the former president of Heal the Bay. So this is our panel. I think they deserve a round of applause. It's truly truly an incredible gathering of talent and accomplishments right here. So just a little bit of context. I don't need to tell you this, but the Palisades and Eaton fires were a climate change-driven cataclysm that claimed 30 souls, scorched tens of thousands of acres, and upended countless lives. The repercussions of all of that are going to haunt us for many, many years to come. In the aftermath, we're still trying to come to grips with the human, economic, and environmental cost. On the water side, our beaches still remain under warnings that swimming is not safe. Beach monitoring results have been done, but they're still not fully analyzed, nor have surface water, groundwater, and subsoil impacts been fully assessed. What this tragedy has done is remind us of the horror of climate change, of the reality of it, and the need to redouble our efforts to increase local water supplies. Now, as a society, we must tackle the daunting task of recovery and rebuilding. And in doing that, we have to strike the right balance between, on the one hand, rebuilding quickly and affordably, and on the other hand, rebuilding sustainably and responsibly. So many questions arise. Do we require homeowners already traumatized to comply with expensive upgrades to safeguard their own and their neighbors' future? Must people along in Malibu rebuild their septic systems to comply with updated standards? Are we providing advantages such as undergrounding electric lines in the stricken areas at the expense of underserved areas? These are the questions that we have to grapple with. And I'm not going to try to answer any of them. This is what we have our panel here for. So with that, though, let us start with our up to 6-minute presentations from each of our panelists, and we will start with Council Member Nazarian.
Wow, no pressure. Great questions to start with, right? First and foremost, thank you very much for your kind introduction, David. It's wonderful. It's an honor to be here at your invitation and to be with all of you. I usually humor and joke with my staff and let them know that I really don't know a lot about issues. I knew how to count votes, and so I was elected. But once I'm elected, I try to surround myself with folks that actually know the issue well and have them come up with the policies that are important in moving forward. So I'm not going to sit here and assume I have the answers. And given that a lot of the questions that are being posed are issues that we're going to be struggling with and moving forward on in committee hearings coming up. So I'm here to offer some suggestions, offer a little bit of hopefully insight as to how I want to approach issues, and for the most part, listen to the experts and take in input from all of you as well, and make myself accessible also for the months and years ahead. So that said, you couched it very well, David, when you talked about the cataclysmic effects of climate change and how this is going to this is probably a precursor to what's ahead on many fronts. What we're not really also addressing or talking about, because our attention has now been deflected in a completely different place, is that as a coastal part of California, we have a heavy concentration of fault lines. And so we have roughly over 200 active fault lines in California, which makes our state geologically a very active area to be in. And we've experienced it firsthand. When I was in the state legislature, I attempted to take steps to make sure that we're building more resilient buildings moving forward so that we reduce harm. We've already done a lot to protect lives. Now we need to take the next step of making sure we reduce the impact, the economic impact that earthquakes seismic activity can place on us. That said, this is no different than that. Water is critical to our existence. Los Angeles does not produce enough water of its own, so we need to bring it in until the time that we clean up our aquifers and get to a place where we're providing at least up to 50% of our own consumption. Right now, we only produce, what, 9%, 10%? 10%. So when you think about 4 million people relying on only 10% of what they produce, 90% of it coming from a different place, that is not a good strategic position to be in. So we're going to we can potentially be very much leveraged, but we also have a great talented pool of individuals in DWP that have been thinking about these issues ahead of time. All that, these are things that I'm constantly going to be working around, and these are the big issue items that I'm going to focus on and make sure we protect, we provide the safe measures that are necessary for our residents. Local government and government in general exists to protect its public. So what are all the steps we need to take to make sure that that primary function is addressed, and then from there on, move on to other areas. So why don't I stop there and look forward to our continued discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So next, for your presentation, Mr. Anselmo Collins.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. I'm glad I'm going after the council member. You hit on a very important thing about water supply and relying on imported water, and I'll touch on that a little more. But obviously, we're here and we're talking about water supply and water quality as it relates to the fires. And the one thing I want to make sure that you get from this discussion is that during the fires, our water supply was very strong. We were flowing at times 4 times the normal amount of water to be able to fight the fires that were happening in Los Angeles. Now, climate change has been a big challenge for us for quite a while, obviously. The councilmember talked about quakes, also, the whole whiplash when it comes to water supply. In 2022, it was the 3rd year of a significant drought, and being able to mitigate for that on years when you have more supply than you can use, be able to store that water, and then in years where you don't have enough, be able to use your local supply that you have stored right here. So that becomes very important. But in the last couple of years now, we also starting to see these wind events that seem to be getting stronger and stronger. 2023, we had a tropical storm too. So it kind of really tells you and it really highlights the fact that climate change is very significant. And as water professionals and water leaders, we have to be able to adapt to that. And that is a big challenge. Now, I will say that during the fire, there was a lot of talk about water supply. Well, I can tell you that the biggest way to fight a wildfire is from the air. The state of LA has billions of gallons available in reservoirs that are no longer part of our distribution system, but water that there's available there specific for fighting fires. Unfortunately, the first 2 days of the fire, it was too dangerous to fly. But as soon as they were able to, the water that we had in those reservoirs were significant in making sure that the Palisades fire, the Sunset Fire, and the Hertz Fire were all put out. That was all done with air assets, which is the biggest tool that the fire department has. Now, since then, we've been working with utilities, industry associations, and academia to find new and innovative technologies that we can use to be able to mitigate for this. Things like, for example, do we build, new storage out there? There's challenges with that as well. You have more storage, you don't have the demands on a regular basis. It's a water quality challenge that we need to face. But also technology can help us perhaps remotely shut down service connections or have backflow preventers on certain, homes because, that was one of the challenges, right, with water quality, was the fumes getting back into our system because depressurized. So these are the things that we're looking at. But let me talk moving forward. We talked about water supply. The council member talked about 90% of the water that we serve our customers is imported. He's absolutely right. It's either from our own aqueduct or water that we purchase from Metropolitan Water District. So we've been working on this for quite a while. We have a lot of local water supply projects that we believe will make us more resilient and also more reliable when it comes to water supply. We're doing that with a couple of things. One is water conservation. We've been conserving a lot of water. Angelenos, as a matter of fact, use less water today than we did 50 years ago, even though we have 1 million more people living in this city. That's the effort that Angelenos have put into water conservation. But we're also looking at cleaning up the groundwater basins. Also, the councilmember mentioned that. And guess what? We have 3 projects about to be completed to be able to clean up the San Fernando Basin, which is the largest basin that the city of LA has access to for groundwater. The next thing we're working on is stormwater capture. We still have more to do there, but we've increased the stormwater capture capacity in the city. And the idea is that when it does rain, we can collect that water and then percolate it into the ground and recharge the groundwater basin. But the biggest part for us is going to be recycled water. When it comes to recycled water, what we want to be able to do is maximize the reuse of the water coming from our wastewater plants. The city owns 4 wastewater plants. We are using every single one of them, but we want to maximize that. Right now, for example, we have a project that just started at the Donald C. Tillman Water Reclamation Plant. This is a project in partnership with LA Sanitation and the Environment, where we're going to be producing 25 million gallons of water every day for groundwater recharge. One of the largest recharge projects and reuse projects in the entire country. And we should be done by 2027, major milestone. However, the biggest program for us is Pure Water Los Angeles. And that's also a program that is in partnership with LA San. The goal there is to be able to recycle the water from Hyperion Water Reclamation Plant, the largest plant the city owns, largest plant west of the Mississippi. We have the potential to produce 230 million gallons of water per day. Just to put that in perspective, right now, our consumption in the city is around 450 million gallons per day. So that program by itself can produce around 230 million gallons. We are going to do it in phases. It is a pretty significant program. We're looking at upwards of 20 years to complete, but the idea is to have deliveries in 2040, 2046, and then 2056. In 2056, have 100% production. But we recognize too that to do this, we need to continue to engage with our stakeholders, the environmental groups. We just finished a master plan. That was a major milestone. We went to a joint meeting of the Board of Public Works and LADWP, presented to them, and now we're going to start on the programmatic environmental impact report. But this is not the end, this is the beginning. It's an opportunity for our stakeholders to engage with us, let us know what they think, let us know ideas they have. We've had a lot of conversations with environmental groups, and I'm sure Mark will touch on that a little bit. Be nice, Mark. I didn't see commitment there, but the idea is that we want to make sure that we can refine and have the most efficient project that can deliver water to Angelenos moving forward. And I'll stop at that point. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, Ms. Felicia Marcus, you have your comments for up to 6 minutes.
Thanks, and hopefully I won't take that long. I'm going to talk about the emergency response in particular. I spent years working on a variety of environmental issues, and for some reason disasters have tended to follow me around in these different jobs, particularly when I headed the public works. What?
Don't say that about Warner.
I'm going to tell him you said that, and it's going to make his day. I know floods, droughts, earthquakes, and then the riots and civil disturbances were sort of my rite of passage. And I want to talk a little bit about how it normally works. I mean, there's a code and a way people work during emergency. It's very well planned. You have, people have all kinds of assignments on what they're point on. The federal and the state government and local government all have sort of, they do drills, they have assignments for what they do, they have leads. So for example, during hazardous waste emergencies or on hazardous waste related issues, EPA tends to take a lead if there's a need there, like the Dunsmuir spill where the train car fell into the river. In issues like this, the Division of Drinking Water will, because drinking water is one of the main things that happen during a fire, particularly a conflagration like this. But for all of them, the mantra and the theory is that the feds and the state figure out how to support the locals. It is a time when the arrogance of the federal and state government are put into submission to the need to support the emergency people on the ground. That is the way it generally works. And in this case, I'll talk about my observations on this time in a minute. I will simply say that throughout that emergency, at least the folks in the state I've talked to, I haven't talked to the EPA folks, were very impressed with the work of DWP and their colleagues there, and the issue of flows that Anselmo talked about. I mean, they had 4 times the normal flows. They stressed their pipes to an almost risky level to get as much water as they could there, despite what you saw in the media, and despite the fact that that reservoir and other things would never have made a difference in a firestorm of this significance, maybe a teeny bit at the margin, but not more. But people worked their heart out, and then they also did, as Richard Katz talked about this morning, an incredible job of getting the system back up and running, which requires going in and dealing with every single house, testing everything, changing out the pipes, flushing the system, testing it again, etc. An amazing amount of work that there's no glory in it, and people don't understand it, but it's really, really important. So here's my observation on this particular fire without getting into it. One of the things that's particularly common in emergencies, and I think about all the ones that I've been through at the local level and at the state level, is it tends to bring out the best in people. You end up with meetings being called. The governor's office will call meetings, and OES is always the lead, the Office of Emergency Services. Senior people all show up. The people on the ground in the Emergency Operations Center, they show up, they stand around a table, they understand what each other is doing so they can figure out how it fits together. Same happens in the EOC here, etc. You know, you get personalities. I could tell you stories about Daryl Gates, but I'll save them for a bar sometime, having to fight with him. But, which is not a picnic, I just want to say. That was not, it's probably I probably grew up 20 years during that one. But people are always saying, I wish everybody got along this well and worked this well together when we weren't in an emergency. And it's really a great thing. And generally, elected officials get out of the way and figure out how they can be helpful. So I'm going to make an observation, present company accepted, because I remember Councilman Nazarian from his time in the state when I was also in the state, and he is somebody who wants to understand the issues, he wants to support the staff, he wants to be helpful. That makes him quite unusual, among many of his peers. But even, and that's just day to day even, you know, a curious mind, intellectual curiosity, wants to know, and how can he find the things he can do to be helpful? Let me simply say that did not happen in this emergency. The political opportunists came out of the blocks while the fire was still raging. And that wasn't just the president, who everybody loves to talk about. I don't, so I'm not going to talk about him anymore, but you were all there. I spent 2 weeks of my life actually explaining why what he was saying was wrong about California water, and I'd like those 2 weeks back. But it also happened at the local level in a way that was unseemly, irresponsible, and definitely not helpful. And it wasn't helpful to the people at the state, federal, and local level who were trying to do the work and who were being pulled off to brief people on levels of detail that was not essential to those elected officials. It reminded me of the way they used to do politics in San Diego. It's not that, I don't know if it's that way anymore, where they'd fight with each other to do the announcement. And so I just think if I was going to make one observation about the response and the state, federal, local response, it would be everything went really well except for the elected officials and the political opportunists. That's all. The final thing I'll say is, and as David presaged in his really good opening remarks, there's still a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work to recover, a lot of stuff that needs to be tested. And most importantly, there are going to be some really challenging public policy decisions to figure out what to do. Because during a fire, and here, on the one hand, you have political opportunists. On the other, in the talking class, and the other side, you've got people who are hurt and people who have lost more than they ever thought they would lose. And they're looking for someone to blame. And so both the electeds, and it makes it very simple for reporters who don't have that next level of time or interest, to swirl in all kinds of directions and think, well, this possibly shouldn't have happened and we should make sure it doesn't happen. But the tough public policy decisions are, what level of risk will we take? Who's responsible for it? And so I think there's going to be a lot of time spent on how much do we spend, how much do we regulate. I mean, just think about the decades we've been dealing with earthquake retrofits, and what the councilman was talking about is very important, because our earthquake standards are geared towards protection of life, not property, because protecting all property so that it won't fall down in a big earthquake is crazy expensive. And the question is, then you won't ever be able to build housing. And so we've got some very difficult issues to figure out, and then who's responsible, particularly in a time when insurance is hard to come by. So just stay tuned, really interesting, and support the doing class versus the talking class as we move forward.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll explore that a little bit more in the follow-up questions. Thanks very much. So, opening remarks from Ms. Crosson.
Thank you, David, and good morning. Great to see lots of familiar faces, and really amazing to be at this table with so many insightful comments and courage. So I'm from Metropolitan Water District. I'm the Chief Sustainability, Resilience, and Innovation Officer. And Metropolitan didn't play sort of a out on the front lines kind of role necessarily during the latest fires in LA County, but we were certainly intimately involved behind the scenes. And a lot of the work that we did was working to set up our own EOC and to participate in the regional EOC that was set up at the Rose Bowl to help and provide mutual aid to our member agencies to ensure they had the resources to respond. So we are an agency, a wholesale water agency to 26 member agencies, and of those, Foothill Municipal Water District, Glendale Water and Power, Pasadena Water and Power were particularly engaged in the response to the Eaton fire up in the Altadena area. And Metropolitan was on the ground immediately to just help ensure that they had the backup power that they required, the backup fuels that they required, and helping to troubleshoot some of the infrastructure losses that they quickly experienced. So that was our role in this particular disaster, but that does not mean that will always be our role. I think that when we look at what happened and you think about the amount of infrastructure that we all have out in the region, and the fact that unfortunately this crisis is one that will likely happen again, that our infrastructure will experience that risk, will potentially be subject to that level of devastation. And so it's really on us to think proactively and use this as an opportunity to better plan and better prepare, and make much more thoughtful and smart decisions about where and how we invest and build our infrastructure. So that's the perspective that I'm coming at this from the Metropolitan spot. And one way that we've been working on that is, for the last couple years, we've been developing a climate adaptation master plan, and that plan is about really transforming the way that we make decisions on our infrastructure investments. So we have for a long time been very successful at planning according to how much water we think we will need to deliver and how much it will cost and how much our member agencies can pay. And while acre feet and dollars are really important metrics to consider, it is now time that when we think about our planning, we're also thinking about its climate resilience, its environmental co-benefits, the impacts on communities, as well as the adaptability and flexibility of the things we build within our systems and within the systems of our partners, and our regional entities on which we really depend. And so within our climate adaptation master plan, our board is voting tomorrow on whether to move forward on the implementation strategy, which means that we would now use a set of evaluative criteria to assess all investments moving forward. That includes, again, not just acre feet and how much reliability, which is important and paramount into the future in different climate scenarios, whether that's a more moderate climate future or a more severe climate future, and how much it costs, but also is the infrastructure, whether it's a conveyance system, we'll be evaluating our Pure Water Southern California recycled water system, whether those infrastructures will actually maintain their own resilience in terms of the materials and the location within different climate impacts, as well as how they will perform in the futures that we anticipate in a climate changed environment. And so, as well as looking at, again, environmental co-benefits, are we able to actually reduce our energy, our carbon footprint in the way that we're implementing these projects? Are we able to provide some ecosystem and biodiversity benefits? And are we thinking about the communities in which we're building these projects? So I think that, I know what we're talking about a lot today is how to rebuild and recover from this particular crisis. And I think that is paramount and important to think about how we rebuild. But we also are making some really tough decisions as a region on what types of infrastructure we're going to invest in. And we need to be thinking about how that really will help us respond to future disasters, help us not just respond, but actually be able to thrive and withstand in these types of crisis situations. And I know when we started this conversation at Metropolitan, it was all about how do we, think about future droughts and hydrological cycles, but we also have to think about fire and flood and sea level rise. And these are things that we're experiencing right now in our infrastructure. We have seen severe impacts of flooding in our infrastructure out along the Colorado River Aqueduct. We've had fires come very close to critical facilities that we operate. Sea level rise is something that is a huge threat to the Delta ecosystem on which all of Southern California has long depended. And so we are really facing some severe challenges and trying to think about how we make decisions that will help us sustain into the future while remaining affordable. And it's really about that acceptable level of risk. What are we willing to pay for? What risk are we willing to take? And that should be based on the best available science, the best available data, and it shouldn't be based on political decisions. And so that's really the impetus for developing a more comprehensive and objective way of decision making, is to move away from these sort of pre-decisional opinions and move towards a more standardized and comprehensive way of looking at the potential infrastructure investments for what we need today and what we're going to need in the decades ahead. So I think that's a really critical point. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. Dr. Mark Gold for your up to 6 minutes opening remarks.
All right, thank you. Liz, very well put. And Anselmo, I'll spare you. I will not talk about local water supply as much as I would love to. You can imagine it's hard for me to not talk about sea level rise issues as well. But I will do what David asked me to do, which is try to cover a lot of stuff real quickly. So hang in there. So on water quality and sediment testing, that has been a big issue. And before I jump into that, I do want to acknowledge, having lived here my entire 61-year life, that Altadena and the Palisades are two of the most unique, amazing communities in the entire region. They're both over a century old. They're both very, very different. And the thing that they do have in common, though, is an incredibly strong community. And so from the standpoint of the potential of the rebuild and that community making sure that something that's going to be rebuilt is going to be better, I do have a little bit of hope, which is very unusual for me. And it's really community-based because it is so extraordinary. And I know there's people in this room who obviously lost a hell of a lot in this whole thing. And I know for me, I'm up to 3-4 dozen friends at this point, so it's pretty horrible stuff. On the water quality and sediment testing, I want to give props to, I see County Public Works is represented here today with Matt Frary and Mark Lombos leading your meetings on a regular basis, giving us sort of the update on what's occurring to try to keep pollution out of our waterways and watersheds in Santa Monica Bay. A little harder to do in San Pedro Bay, but one that is also there. What we've seen so far in the water quality testing, and believe me, I'm usually the most critical person here, is that the levels haven't been as high as I would have expected, which is actually surprises me in the other way and makes me look at it in a different way. There's so many, for example, nickel-cadmium batteries melted down, et cetera, and we're not seeing cadmium spikes as an example in water quality, which I find really interesting. Tracy Quinn, who couldn't make it today, Gila Bay and County Public Works and County Health, working with the state, the Regional Water Quality Control Board. I've been doing a lot of water quality monitoring right now. You see metal spikes that are really more of an impact on aquatic life, not so much at the human health levels of things like beryllium and zinc and lead and copper and nickel and chromium, arsenic and nutrients. pH's results have been high. They've been a little slow coming, but they haven't been like through the roof. And that's important to note because in many fires that has been the case. But I also want to let you know this is sort of early data, and a lot of the academics, which use very different techniques that might have much lower detection limits, they haven't put out their data yet, and that's going to take a long time. But the good news is that overall there's 26 different agencies, 194 different sites that are being monitored for runoff and on the beach. Beach cleanup, I also want to give props to beaches and harbors. They kind of got stuck with everything and trying to clean up what's on the beach, which is just unprecedented in what that has been. And the testing of that material, you can imagine, not an easy thing to do. There's not a lot of protocol on how to do that well. So that's what's up on the water quality side there. I'm part of this LA County Blue Ribbon Commission working with UCLA, putting together 30-day recommendations and 90-day recommendations. I'm in the water group, helping to run that one. And we have some recommendations here. Not going to have time to get into them in great detail, But we looked at the regional and neighborhood scale. We looked at things like funding mechanisms. We looked at parcel scale, a whole bunch of different issues in relation to that. Yes, we'll agree with what was said, that from the standpoint of the fact that the firefighting the aerial firefighting was grounded, obviously was the biggest issue here that was the problem. But it also, the scope and scale of this urban fire demonstrated really where our vulnerability was in a way that we just never had thought of before, which is we don't have localized storage at the hyper local in the way that that we really need. We don't have, from the standpoint of storage at the parcel scale, to be able to reduce risk for an individual parcel at the scale that we need. We don't have interconnectivity between systems. The Santa Monica reservoir system's not hooked into the City of LA reservoir system, which is an issue. Obviously, the buffer zone issue, which is something that our commission has spent a lot of time in. We have 6 different committees with 20 different people working on all these various different issues. And we spent a lot of time on this. And one of the things I think is really important, and one of the bigger ideas that's coming out of this group, is that we need a significant buffer zone at the wildland-urban interface. And to think that we can really create resilience at that interface on the parcel-by-parcel scale has, I think, proven to be a total failure. And it doesn't mean that vegetation clearance and home hardening isn't important, but if someone doesn't do it, you got a problem. And these are urban fires. These were not your typical wildfires. And we saw embers, because the winds, travel 2-3 miles or more. I often bring up the fact that the Cal Coffee monitoring cruises from Scripps and NOAA were 100 miles offshore and seeing ash during the fire. So this was just absolutely extraordinary in what was happening. So it brings up the buffer issue, which means who owns the wildland side in LA County? Well, that's local, state, and federally owned public lands. And I would never say this a year ago, never ever say this a year ago. But I truly believe that the buffer zone needs to be on the wildland side, and it needs to be 100-foot minimum, and there needs to be some sort of revenue generation, whether that's a benefit assessment district or some sort of parcel tax, where those who get the benefit of reduced fire risk, where you clear that area, you plant it with ecotope appropriate vegetation, because you're not going to plant the same thing way out in Eaton Canyon that you are along the coast, along Malibu and the Palisades, and you have to have operation and maintenance over time. You can't have one of these things where it's like, yeah, we'll have an inspector look at it once every blue moon, and hopefully that'll protect us. That failed. And so we have to do better there on the buffer zone side. So that's just one thing. There's way more to that. I think this demonstrated the importance of things like low impact development ordinances with on-site storage and how that can help you at the individual parcel scale. We're going to rebuild all these schools, all these parks. We better do it in a green fashion, where we're looking at it from the standpoint of, can we build cisterns that can help us on this hyper-local storage to have defend our spaces, and a lot more that we can do on defensible space. I've barely scratched the surface here, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thanks very much. That's very good. Okay, so we're going to now move into our round of moderator questions. And so I'll start with you, Councilmember Nazarian. I'll stand up here so that I can have the microphone.
Not the best thing to always be the first one to answer questions, by the way.
All right. So in December, you introduced a motion to investigate the impacts of corporations buying homes here in Los Angeles, and the impact that may have on our housing crisis. Are you seeing that pattern repeat with respect to homeowners in the stricken areas? Many of them may be despairing of negotiating all of the hurdles of rebuilding. They may be desperate for cash. Are they being tempted to sell cheap to perhaps unscrupulous players? What is it that you're seeing there? And what is it that we can do to provide some protection to these folks?
Thank you for the great question.
You have 2 minutes.
What happened to 6? Okay.
That was for the introduction remark. I've got, see what I'm saying? There's Wendy over there.
She's saying 10. All right.
But of course, the entire 10 minutes is only for
All
council
good.
members.
All good. So I'll keep it brief. By the way, Mark, I gotta say, I appreciate all the comments I've been hearing. Mark, I so appreciate you talking about the reservoir systems interconnectivity. That's something that I'd love to see if I can help work with you on, and DWP.
Yeah, I'd love to work
with
with
all
both
of you, because we don't have enough police officers, right? And so what do police agencies do? They create an inter-system operating mechanism so that they can address different issues, because you don't want to hire too many officers either, because during prosperous times, they're just going to sit around, and it's going to cost quite a bit of money for local agent departments. So what do? You make sure that everyone's connected and everyone's working so that you fill in the gaps. So that's something that I'm surprised that we haven't had that system in place. To your question, David, thank you very much for bringing that up. That was the first measure that I actually introduced. This was something that I was trying to work on when I was still in the state legislature, but ironically enough, one of my colleagues did not want to hear the Met bill in Housing Committee, and so it died. When you see what's going on with corporate ownership of single-family properties, I'm shocked we're not talking about this enough. And by the way, there's a differentiation between local developers and folks that are trying to get in and buy properties and then develop them and put it back in the market. Some of them may have some unscrupulous practices, but at the end of the day, they're putting it back into the market at least. And I'm just having a very frank conversation here. But the entities that exist on paper and will once they own the property, they will never put it back into the market space. That piece of property is now gone for a very long time. And that then creates havoc in the markets. It reduces our middle class. It reduces middle class ownership of property. It has long-term impacts on equity building for middle class families. And so my measure was very, very simple. What I want to do is make sure we're capping the number of single-family homes owned by any single entity. And when it comes to corporations and LLCs and all the games that they play, goes up to the parent company. So you have to identify who the parent company final arbiter or decision maker is, and place a cap on how many pieces of single-family properties can be owned by that entity, so that we reduce the ownership, the hoarding of single-family properties by one entity, because they can then drive the market. It's not going to take, there's many of you who do this on a regular basis, so I don't want to presume your jobs, but it doesn't take a great deal of ownership to then be able to manipulate the market. We're talking about single-digit, handful of digits of percentages can allow you to manipulate the market. We shouldn't allow that to be happening. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got, there's so many detailed issues to get into on so many different levels. I wish that we had more time. I really do.
I'm happy to stay.
Always available. Always available.
We'll move everybody into the hallway. No, I need more than 5 minutes. I've got everybody else here.
Just go, David.
Okay, David, I need more than 5 minutes.
2.
Okay, fine. AGM comments. So, I mean, everybody knows that I have a soft spot for the department, so having been there as a commissioner and as general manager. But I know how hard department folks work in order to restore water service to the Palisades. In very difficult circumstances, with a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. But I'd like you to take a couple of minutes and just take us behind the scenes as to how that was done in 2 months in such record time. And again, I wish I could give you more time than 2 minutes.
I'm a bit long-winded, so I'll try really hard to do it quickly. But thanks for the question. During the fire, we lost pressure in the system. And the main reason we lost the pressure is because we had more hydrants being used simultaneously than the system was designed for. Municipal water systems are designed for structure fires, not for wildfires. In addition to the fire hydrants being used, we also had homeowners that, before they left, turn on their sprinkler system or turn on their hoses to saturate the area. And then the other thing that was probably played a biggest role was, as homes were being destroyed, now you got a service connection that's just throwing water onto the ground. And that's the reason why we ended up losing pressure. Now, when in 2024, the state actually passed a new law. It's a wildfire response order. And it says that if you have a fire that's over 300 acres and you lose pressure, then you got to test for things like benzene and volatile organic carbons. Benzene is something you find in a lot of things. The wood that they used to build the homes with, paints, glues, different things like that. So sure enough, in this case, we had to test for that. We first had a do not drink notice on January 8th. January 10th, we had to supersede that with a do not drink notice. And the first thing that we had to do was restore pressure. We had to have staff out there by hand shutting off over 4,800 service connections. Imagine that, 4,800 service connections. That was the only way we were able to reestablish pressure. We did that in 10 days after the fire started. So by the 17th, we have pressure in the entire system. Now, because of this wildfire order, we had to test to demonstrate that the water quality was still high. We had to come up with a plan, working with the Division of Drinking Water, where we had to flush our system, which is like 95 miles of pipe in that area. We did it twice. Then we had to take a representative sample of all the connections to homes that were lost, and we had to test it out. So we had to flush the system, we had to isolate those systems for 3 days, test it, or sample, and then take the test, send out all information to the state. We were able to actually lift the do not drink notice for 2 of the 9 service zones in late February, and the other 7 service zones in early March, by March 7th, so pretty much in 2 months. It took working every single day, 7 days a week, folks putting in 12-hour days to be able to get this done. But really what it also took was a lot of cooperation by the regulator to help us out. And the last thing I'll say that I think is important is, when we talk about communication being important, we need to make sure that the community knew the water was safe to drink. So we developed this story map online that you were able to put in your address. It will tell you which pressure zone you were in, because most people don't know what a pressure zone is. It had information on the testing, the results, any kind of bottled water distribution centers that we had. So the information was put there available for the customers to know, because there was a lot of misinformation, and that was the way to correct that. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Felicia, you answered my question in your opening remarks about the role of OES and the. But if you want to elaborate
Just
for a minute.
20 seconds I'd
20
add, just
seconds
because
is
I
good.
want to defer, because I didn't get to the issue in Altadena. I mean, the flip side, and this is not a critique, of what DWP was able to do, in Altadena you have 3 different small water agencies which simply don't have the capacity to do what they just did the same way. So it kind of highlights the issues of scale and the fragmentation, which is not to say small is bad, it's just that overmatched by something like this, and it calls into question what we do next. And so DDW had to do more in Altadena to be helpful, whereas at DWP they didn't. And so that scale of the water systems all over this is true all over the state. The small ones may have more local control and people like them because they were there, but they don't have the economy of scale that they need, which doesn't mean everything needs to be as big as DWP, by sure, but there's a cutoff point where folks need more help.
Okay, thank you for that. Ms. Crosson, just turning to you for a second. So we heard that Pure Water LADWP's Hyperion project is going to be delayed, although Tillman and the project there is really a cause for celebration. But that leaves Pure Water Southern California, that MWD is working on with LA County Sand, as the major recycling project here in this region. What is the timeline for that? When do you think it's going to start producing water?
Thank you. Well, I guess first of all, I would just say that, the opportunity for these systems to interconnect and work together is really, cannot be overstated. And so although the Metropolitan project is a little further ahead, I don't think that necessarily negates the importance or the opportunity for later on the importance of connecting with LA's project. So for those of you who aren't aware, Metropolitan is working with LA County sanitation districts to build a 150 million gallon per day water recycling facility in Carson. And we are actually right now doing kind of the final review of our draft EIR. So that should be out on the street either at the end of this month or the very first week of May. And so that will kick off a public review period of a system that includes both an advanced water treatment facility down in Carson as well as about 50 miles of pipeline up into the Azusa area to connect to our water treatment facility. It's very likely, and I think probably very intelligent, that our board and others will make the decision to phase this project to really determine, and this is again, what I was talking about earlier, when we evaluate projects and we think about the adaptability and flexibility and really thinking about the science and the demands and what we actually think we're going to need, it may make sense to start on the west side and do some local distribution, and that would probably happen in the early 2030s, and then building the pipeline would happen later and add about 115 MGD until we eventually build a pipeline over to our water treatment facility. So we're looking in the early 30s for some water, and we're looking for interconnection with our partners.
I think we're being asked to give up the room. Mark, final question for you. Okay, and I
12 seconds.
I know it's going to be a really quick answer. The Army Corps of Engineers is only going to test soil in the fire-stricken areas down to 6 inches. Right. What
Right.
happens if there is contamination that's below 6 inches? Who bears that responsibility? Is it the homeowner that have to do their own?
Yeah, right now the homeowners are screwed. So this is the first time where the feds have basically said, yeah, we're taking our 6 inches, too bad. That's as far as you're going, you're on your own. And so that's absolutely reprehensible. And to think that the people's public health will be put at risk in that cavalier manner is absolutely unacceptable.